Hello and welcome to Model Kit Stuff, and today we are looking at a ship. It's first impressions time. Tamiya's British battleship King George V, the KG5 to you and me. Right, let's have a quick look at the box. As we look at the front of the box, we've got a very nice bit of artwork. It looks very North Atlantic to me, that artwork, choppy, dark seas. But yeah, it's a lovely bit of artwork. It tells us that it's a 1:350 scale and that the length is just over 1/2 metre. And that it's a fairly decent sized kit, ready to assemble, precision model kit. And then that's repeated in Japanese, I think. On the side, we've got some imagery in blue camouflage and in grey camouflage, and they do tell you that the actual model is not correctly configured for that camouflage, which is interesting. On the other side, we have a top-down view, a helicopter view if you like, and some history in Japanese. Right then, the HMS King George V, very special ship for me because a family member served on her during part of his wartime service. So in 1941, my great uncle was serving as the meteorological rating when the King George V engaged and was part of the rather heavy bombardment of the German battleship Bismarck. So there's quite a story around that. I have told it before, and if you're interested in it, go and dig out the build of HMS Anthony, where we talk about that in quite a bit of detail. Anyway, this model will be a labour of love for me. But what we're doing right now is looking at what is the task at hand. So we will go through the instructions in a minute. But for those of you who might not be quite as well acquainted with the King George V as I am, let's just take you through the very basics. So HMS King George V is the lead ship of 5 battleships in the King George V class, and she was laid down before the war in 1937, getting her commission in 1940, and is a warship that actually operated in all the main theatres. So she was part of the Home Fleet, operated in the Atlantic, operated in the Mediterranean, and also operated at the end of the war in the Pacific, and that's why I guess Tamiya released this. They then released the sister ship Prince of Wales, which we previously reviewed on the channel as a first impressions, and the Prince of Wales is basically an alteration of this tooling, which came out a year later. So Tamiya released this kit in 1985, so we're expecting a 1985 standard. Now, my great uncle would tell you that the King George V was a wet ship, to use his terms, which means it shipped in quite a lot of water at the bows, and that was a result of her being designed within the confines of the Washington Naval Treaty, and she was limited to 35,000 tons, although actually she displaced a bit heavier than that, at around 38 to 39,000 tons, and that increased again when she had a refit later in the war. But her design, her configuration, her number of main guns, and the configuration of the main guns with 4 barrels and 2 barrels and 4 barrels is all to do with weight saving and designed to fit in with the Washington Naval Treaty. So she's not really the pinnacle of Navy design for battleships. She is the best they could do within the confines of what they were operating to. So an interesting fact, she had 8 boilers. When you compare that to the Hood's 24 boilers, there was some considerable saving of space, albeit they were larger boilers, and it made her the fastest ship in the British fleet. But she was still slower than the Italians, the French and the Germans, so pretty much anyone she was likely to come up against. At the start of her career, she was primarily hanging around the Scapa Flow area. She did support some operations in Norway and did cover some convoys as well in the North Atlantic. I guess the battleship Bismarck incident was her first major engagement, and after the Hood had sunk, she was part of the Sink Bismarck at any cost. And really was leading that. Obviously her sister ship, the Prince of Wales, having received a fairly good pounding by the Germans. As the Bismarck got pounded into submission, the King George V was actually the main target for Bismarck, though they didn't receive any direct hits at all. But as my great uncle pointed out, when you're firing all your main guns, all sorts of minor damage is done, trunking, splits and the like, and certainly there was a little event in the meteorological office. The next notable event, I guess, is the collision with HMS Punjab, the destroyer. It got cut in two in fog and sank in a rerun of what happened to my other great uncle, who drowned on the Duchess when colliding in fog with HMS Barham. In the Mediterranean, she saw action in Operation Husky, doing some shore battery work. She escorted, captured or surrendered Italian ships to Malta and then later on to Alexandria in Egypt. So yeah, quite a little bit of stuff in the Mediterranean, and then after heading back home to Liverpool, where she was given a bit of an overhaul, which included the installation of a radar and some more anti-aircraft guns. She then went pretty much over to the Pacific, along with the HMS Illustrious, Indomitable, Indefatigable, Victorious, and various cruisers and destroyers. So heading up the Pacific operation effectively. The British Pacific Fleet, led by the King George V, primarily did shore battery work. There was some skirmishes with the Japanese Air Force and bits and pieces, and I think she even shot an aircraft down, which was a bit of a rarity, really. And then she was in Tokyo Bay for the surrender of Japan at the end of the war. So she survived the war to become a training ship. I think around about 1950 she then went into reserve. I think she was the largest ship that the Navy had ever mothballed, but some of her sister ships got mothballed at the same time. Vanguard being left as the principal capital ship of the Royal Navy. And then ultimately in the late 50s, 1957 I think it was, she ended up getting scrapped in the UK. So it's important to say that the kit that Tamiya produced is the ship as she was in 1945 in Tokyo Bay. So there had been a small number of modifications. Now, in terms of the hull, the most obvious being that the degaussing cable was external until she had work done in the middle of 1942 when it was replaced with an internal one. So the hull without the degaussing cable is correct for 1945, but you need degaussing cable all the way around the outsides of her if you're depicting her with the engaging Bismarck period. Also, she had right in 1941, she had a radar added, and then she had a UP mounting removed in December 41, and an additional pom-pom, Oerlikon added, and some radars were also added. So there's quite a bit of change that happens after the engagement with the Bismarck, and so you've got quite a bit of backdating to do, so that the mast arrangements will look different, and quite a lot of these guns are added sort of 1944 when she has a further refit. So there are a number of changes that happen that you've got to reverse if you're going to build it in 1941, guys. So that's worth bearing in mind. This is not build it out of the box and have a 1941 King George V. With all that out of the way, let's have a look at the instructions. So we get a nice little history, got some pictures, and just to prove a point that I was just making, when we open this we can see here picture of the decals in cable on the outside of the hull. So that shows her as she was completed, so that's what you're looking to replicate for her time with the Bismarck. So yeah, that's a nice little reference picture right from the off, and you can see other details that like the tripod leg for the jack staff, for example, and oh look, depth markers all the way up to the hose pipe. Then we've got we've got more history, and then we have a history of British capital ships, 1906 to 1945. Let's see if we can find Iron Duke, Queen Elizabeth, Royal Sovereign. That's my grandfather's first ship. Indefatigable, Lion, Tiger, Renown, Hood, Nelson, King George V, and then the Vanguard. So yeah, and you can see how much longer the hood was in that profile picture, so that's interesting. Okay, construction starts with the lower hull. We've got our rudder and prop shafts, propellers going in, and then we're building up the main guns, and I'm guessing that's because they have a way of mounting into the deck before the deck's put down. But yeah, we've got some little before you read instructions here, so quite the layout's not quite as it is these days. It's perhaps a bit clearer these days, and it gives you some commentary on geometry, but the nice clear instructions. When we turn over, we've got some drilling to do. It tells you what size drill bits to do, so that's nice and clear, and we've got a picture of what this should look like when finished and painted up, which is nice, albeit in black and white. And what they're having you do is add all these gun tubs to the deck and the winding machinery and your main armament. We've got some booms, capstans, and the other bits and pieces all being put in, painted up before we put the decks in place. And that's because we've got these little studs going in so you can rotate the guns. But obviously you can just plop them in and let gravity do its thing. So for me personally, I wouldn't be adding them at this stage, but that's just me possibly. Then when we flip over, we've got showing you the positions of the decks for centre aft deck, and it's telling us about how to attach them, and that how to attach the parts that go in between the deck, where we've got these little dashes, so that you have a correct orientation so that you don't get a gap basically. Telling us to secure with cellophane tape until the cement has set. So I'm guessing Tamiya hadn't brought out their range of masking tapes by then. And then we can see we've got a couple of deck sections going in there, blanking plates. I think that's where the boat deck goes ultimately. And we carry on with that in the foredeck. And then we're starting to build up the superstructure. I remember this quite clearly. We've got some ventilators being built as a sub-assembly off to the side there, and then they're being used there. Aft boiler room vent. So it's nice that they mention what at least some of the parts are. Then we've got our little stack of dinghies and the little superstructure going down, and some. But it's asking us to do those in metallic grey, but I would have thought those were hosepipe reels. Anyway, probably worth doing a little bit of research anyway. Ship's boats being built up. Trim off the long keel off the 32-inch cutter for ease of attaching to D39, so that must be stacked. So it does show you an image of all the ship's boats when they've been stacked there. And it's telling you what they are: 27-foot whaler, 14-foot sailing dinghy, fast motorboat, 25-foot. Yeah, gives you all of what those are and the paint instructions. So telling you that it's flat white on the inside with... It doesn't tell you what it is on the outside. Might be more instructions later on. Got some superstructure going down there and some plastic ladders. Fortunately not moulded on, so easy to replace. Obviously you've got a little bit of deck filling to do where the location pins won't be being used. Flip her over and we've got forward superstructure going in, or the bottom of it. You can see it being built there with the stepped deck, and then we've got the wing pieces going in. Various bits of equipment being mounted into the bridge section of the forward superstructure, and then we've got anti-aircraft guns and bits and pieces, ladders and the like being added. Yeah, all good. Actually, the build sequence makes sense to me, so it's probably how I go around building it. They're doing it pretty much center out and level up, so that's generally how I build. More ventilators being built in the side piece there, and then we've got superstructure being built. Got I think, is that for lamps? I think that's a search lamp platform. Then we've got our range finders going in, and then that all gets assembled down. Building of the funnels, various little bits going on. So we've got a little walkway going on there and a gun platform. More ladders and dinghies, and some more images of what that should look like built up. And you can see there in their picture that the crane doesn't line up. That's interesting. There's a little commentary here on paint markers, handheld Tamiya enamel paint markers for the final detail touch and professional result. 12 of the most popular colours used in modelling. See and test them at your local hobby supply house. Okay, if only I had one that was local. Right, we're on step 18 now, and we've got some sub-assemblies at the side. So we've got bofers, pom-poms, and that 13.3 centimetre guns, or 5.25s. And then we're placing those in. So she's bristling with guns, really, isn't she? She's got plenty on, and it's showing you both sides, so you can do one side and do the other. so it's nice and clear. And that's all we do in step 18. Step 19, again, more sub-assemblies on the side, and we're adding smaller details now, so deck guns, searchlights and the like. Some booms and ladders. And then we flip over to 20, and we're adding our anchors at this point, jack staff, 20mm olicons, going in fore and aft. Not quite sure what that is. So yeah, that's all looking nice. Then we're building up the mast. So we've got foremast and mainmast. We're also building up the crane, which has several components to pull that together. I seem to remember that it pivots, so it is posable should you wish to. Yeah. And then something they don't really do now, but is nice to see, we have a little rigging diagram, and it's showing you positions of the flags. So yeah, referencing the decal numbers, and so the flags must be decals. We'll have a look at that in a minute. And yeah, mounting it on its base and building the base. All very good. Telling you to make the rigging out of stretch sprue, which is interesting. That was quite common with Tamiya kits, I seem to recall. And then on the back we've got our painting instructions. So it's going with anti-fouling red, which they're saying is XF7 plus XF10 flat brown, so to make it a sort of red-brown colour. Then we've got dark grey XF24 for the torpedo belt, flat black, which is for the boot line, which is incorrect because it was gloss, not flat. And then we've got light sea grey mixed with flat white for the upper works and the upper hull. So a bit of paint mixing to do if you're going to use Tamiya paints. And then we've got things, field blue top, field blue deck, not sure about that. Yeah, deck tan for the deck, which is obvious. So I think there's a little bit of research there for what colours you want to be using. But yeah, there you go. That is the instructions. Oh, we've got a part list at the back with our sprue parts, and tells us what paint colours we want. Yeah. And that carries on through to the last page. So there you go. It says parts, hull, tweezers and decals. I don't remember seeing any tweezers in there. Wonder what they mean by that. Right, okay, so we've got the instructions done. Let's have a look at some plastic. So we're going to have a look at the hull now. Now for moulding that's nearly 40 years old, it's not looking too shabby, in fairness. There is some scuffing on the hull, but it's fairly minor. But that's been done by rubbing up against the cardboard in the box, I suspect. It's the older style. It was quite common around this time for hulls to be marked out with painting positions. So we can see the boot lines being marked out along here. It's up to you whether you leave it on. It certainly makes masking a lot easier. But obviously it wasn't on the real ship, and you will lose some of that when you clean up things like the sink that we've got here in the bow. You can see there's quite a big ridge of sink in there. We need to do a little bit of work on the front. There should be a couple of holes in there, Need to drill out the hose pipes, and we can see that the scuttles here are elongated a little bit, so generally you'd refill those and drill them out again, or fill them, put photo etch rings around them, and then paint them in. Depends on which way you want to do it. Probably I will drill them out, but the moulding is nice and crisp. And it's full hull. We've got a seam that we have to clean up, but you know what? Cleanup's fairly minimal on it. In fairness to it, the shape is generally right. It looks okay to me without getting calipers out and testing it. So yeah, all good. We've got good positioning for the propellers, although probably there is some work to be done there if you're that way inclined. Not everyone is, of course. And these are a little bit chunky as well, and you could channel them out, but in fairness, when painted, look inside on, you're not going to see them. So we're not going to worry too much. Yeah, nothing wrong with that as a whole. Very nice. The stand is the original stand that came out with the kit. So you get two sprue which are identical, and they marry together to make two halves of a stand. You get a flat edge on the stand, so you're either going to do some modification or glue it down. It's too thin to be screwed into, or you're going to discard it. Right, sprue C, and what we've got here is primarily superstructure parts, although we do have some bits for the mast here. And what we've got is what I think is forward superstructure. I might be wrong. We've got the bridge front here, which is nicely moulded, but fairly simplified in fairness. We've got nice crisp moulding throughout, though. There's no flash, even though it's really quite an old tooling now. It's not showing any signs of age. We've got our aircraft hangers there, which are shut. There isn't an option to have them open. We've got moulded on ladders, which actually aren't bad for moulded on. They look okay. Some people might argue they're a bit chunky, but they're okay. And we've got some simple watertight doors on there and some hatches. When you look at these have got a little bit more detail on, but again, they're nicely moulded, but there's no trunking or pipework or anything like that, so it is a little bit simplified. But the moulding is nice and crisp, and we've got quite a nice bit of moulding around the wind deflectors there, and the splinter shields actually quite thin. I certainly see worse than that sometimes on more recent kits. And then we've got the tripod legs, and you just know it's all going to fit together gloriously. And I'm guessing there's a blanking plate for that rather large chunky box, so I'm not quite sure. We'd have to have a look at our references to see what detail needs to be on there, because it's just a flat square box at the moment. Sprue B, and we've got funnels, turrets, rudders. So the rudders are completely smooth. You can see it's two halves there. We've got what looks like a capstan with a little bit of detail on top. The seam is typically heavy on the little A-frames for the propeller shafts there. We've got a little textured platform, our jack staff. Yeah, they're quite nicely done. I think they are for the propeller shafts. You don't have metal ones in this. We've got plastic ones, and our guns are solid barreled. The funnels, again, fairly basic, but the main sort of detail is there, but there's no pulleys on them or anything like that. And then look at that superstructure side, it's just completely bereft of anything. And there must have been something on there. Our main gun turrets got some rivet detail on them, and some ammunition boxes. Yeah, fairly basic as I look at them, really. And the same with these bases. And now we've got funnel bases, which are okay, but then the funnel top is completely solid as well. So it's all crisply moulded. There's no issues with it other than it just feels a little bit basic, doesn't it? Sprue D now, we have 2 of these, and we've got a whole collection of parts here, so let's have a look from the start. We've got anti-aircraft guns, and look how crisp and clear they are. After all these years of constantly producing this kit, the moulding is as crisp as the first day back in the mid-80s. It's really nice. Yeah, so we've got the bases of the catapults there, some spot lamps, cable or hose reels, which are fairly basic. Tops of the, I think they're the range finders, I think. We've got some ship's boats there. And the larger launch has actually got raised planking detail on there. Solid cabins, but you know what, painted up, it'll look alright. Nicely done hulls. The smaller boats, no clinker on them. If we turn it over, actually not too bad with the ejector marks. Quite often you get really bad ejector marks. That one's not as good. Easily sorted though. There's a little trick with some liquid poly and a very sharp knife to sort them out. Our search lamps are solid with separate backs. Then we've got our range finders there, and our main guns again solid. We've got our pom-pom bases there. Again, the railings are all solid on these as well, which is how I built it originally, I remember. Then we've got the little cranes, again, solid. Yeah, the propellers, they're not too bad. They're a bit chunky, but they're tapered sufficiently to look the part. Then we've got some horrid plastic ladders. Some quite nicely detailed floats there, some winding gear and booms, and then some more secondary guns and our pyrovanes. So there we go. Moulding is lovely and crisp as it has been throughout. Sprue E has a number of larger parts on there. So we've got some deck pieces building up the front of the ship there. We've got platforms. And because this is the 1945 configuration, we've got a little radar dish. We've got our mast there. It's a little bit flashy now, the mast, but it's not too bad. And the weather vane. This is our superstructure parts. They look quite chunky, but that is how it was on the original ship. Big, steep, slab-sided superstructure. We've got no deck detail at all on here. I don't know whether it's steel or no anti-slip of some type. We'd have to look at that. Same with these decks, all steel, and you can see we've got chunky wedge ladders which really want cutting out and replacing. Our starfish doesn't look too bad actually. Basic, but you know, it's all there. And I think they are spotting platforms. And a bit more of our mast there. So let's have a look. So it does, the whole feel of the kit is somewhat simplified. So the lockers have got no doors on, they're just sort of big featureless lumps. And so are the sides of some of the superstructure, you know, they're just featureless lumps, no doors or anything. So it's a little underwhelming by modern standards, but it's all there and it's very nicely moulded and it will go together easily. Sprue F, and again we've got some deck features here. This is our boat deck. And if I turn it over, you can see it is just slab-sided. We've got a little bit of gusset detail, and then our boat shocks are all moulded in, quite thick and chunky, lacking any detail. So you'd want to replace those with some photo etch personally. Then we've got our deck here, which has got positions for some structures, funnel, guns and bits and pieces, but again it's all fairly featureless really. More deck, a little boat, anti-aircraft gun positions which are fairly basic, another mast section. The decks look a bit chunky on that. This is little bulwark sections, but they look quite nice actually. Radar, rangefinder, fire control, that sort of stuff. Observation deck, and yeah, another rangefinder. So although it's all crisp, it's all nicely done, it's simple and a bit chunky looking. Sprue G, again we have two of these, and well, the largest part on there is our little placard, and it's really nice because it doesn't say Tamiya on it, it doesn't say 1 to 350 scale on it, it just says British Battleship King George V. It'd be nice if it said HMS, in fairness, but you know, I can live with that. That is better than what they do more recently, which is put a sticker on with the Tamiya logo on and stuff, which personally I think detracts from it. On here we've got our light deck guns, which have separate shields, which back in 1985 was an absolutely awesome feature. But yeah, that's really nice. We've got a little strip here, which is a little deck strip I seem to remember from when I built it last. We've got a little chunky ladder, some more anti-aircraft guns, and another ship's boat. And then we've got loads and loads of gun tubs. The 1945 version of them is absolutely littered with them. Then we have a bag that has our deck parts in. So we've got 3 sections of deck, as we saw in the instructions. We'll deal to start with our bow. So working from the front backwards, we've got a raised planking detail, which actually under a wash doesn't look so bad. We've got moulded on anchor chain. The benefit of the moulded on anchor chain is it's actually depicted as proper stud chain, which is nice. And our but it stops on the top of the hose pipe openings, which you need to drill out. So the reality is these days you're going to remove that and put some actual chain in. It does have the little breaker chains on there as well. Then we've got the places for our capstans to go. Breakwater, it's not too chunky, but again has no detail of any note on it. Then we have lots of little ready-use lockers and the like. Again, they're just blocks with no detail on whatsoever. Same with these lower ones, they're just little squares that you paint basically. Moulded on cable reels, which is disappointing, but part of the course for Tamiya. They do some that are separate and others they mould in. They still do it now. I have no idea why they do it. It detracts because you've now got a D shape rather than an O shape. It just detracts it, and I don't know why they still do it, but there you go. Then we've got a secondary breakwater which needs a little bit of work just to thin it out there as it meets the barbette structure. So our gun positions there. Yeah, and we've got some moulded in middle section which has got areas marked out for the seating of the superstructure sections and the section there with the boat deck that goes on. And again, it continues the raised deck planking and more cable reels moulded on, and lots of detail. That's just a block of plastic really, so not much in the way of detail on there, but lots of little things to paint. Now we're at the stern deck and it just continues that theme. Lots of raised, overly simplified lumps that we need to paint up in our chosen colour, but it's all crisp. There's no major issues, unless of course you want to put a wood deck on it and you've got quite a bit of sanding and deck prep to do, but otherwise all good. Now we have a little decal sheet here. And this is the full amount of decals that you get. So we've not got any depth markers, and we've not got any markings for aircraft, but I don't think there's any aircraft included, which is a bit of a disappointment. What you do have is decals for the flags, and that's great because they moved away from doing this and went to this printed paper, and this is a far superior way of doing it. You can take these off, put them on some foil, and immediately you've got something that becomes quite posable for wind fluttering and the like. So yeah, you've got several flags. You've got the battle ensigns, and you've got the Union flag and the various admiral flags, depending on how you want to do it. But yeah, this is exactly the decal sheet that you would have got back in 1985. In fact, it still has the 1985 copyright on it. So there you have it, Tamiya's 1:350 scale British battleship, or His Majesty's ship King George V. What are my first impressions? It's a lovely model. Don't get me wrong, before I say anything else, it's a lovely model, and in 1985 when it came out, it was, I wouldn't go as far as to say it was cutting edge, but it was a high standard model ship kit at that time. When you consider what its competitors were doing, the 1600 stuff from that had been come out over the 60s and 70s of the 80s, it was far superior in terms of detail and crispness of moulding and finesse of engineering. If you think about the Hella ships, it was in many ways on the par with the Hella ships, but the finesse of the moulding is better, and the scaling of the parts is better. So it was a really good model when it came out in 1985, but it is absolutely showing its age now. But it does give you a really nice start point. So there is aftermarket available. There's quite a bit. There's photo etch. There is some resin. There is 3D printed parts. So there's all sorts of bits and pieces, wood decks and the like that you can get for her now. Highlights, lowlights. Highlights for me is the fact that we actually have a model of her, because other than the Bismarck, nothing that she did was majorly famous, really, you know. And for a Japanese company to make her, she had to have done something in the Pacific. So in a way, she was lucky that she was in Pacific operations. Otherwise, I doubt that Tamiya would have ever made a model of her. And she's still not been done by the likes of Trumpeter, although there is a 1:350 scale Prince of Wales that came out a year or so ago. So if you want to build the King George V, you're pretty limited, and this is the one that you're going to end up going to in 1:350 scale at least. So the downside is you've got a little bit lacking in the decals. I have to say it, because there isn't depth markers and things that should be there. But the biggest downside is the model is depicted in 1945, so you've got a little bit of work to do, because most people, I suspect, that want to build her in Europe probably want to see her as she was in her 1941 Bismarck chase configuration. So if you want to do that, you're going to need to buy into this, which is the Pontos King George V 1941 detail upset. So if you're interested in that, stay tuned for part 2 coming soon. Otherwise, this is a cracking little kit. If you're up for building a model ship and you want a nice straightforward ship and easy to build, goes together well and looks impressive, then this absolutely ticks all those boxes. When you put it on your shelf at a distance, the silhouette, it's going to look great. If you look up close to it, you're going to see that it looks a bit basic, certainly by modern standards. And if that's going to bother you, you are going to need to get some aftermarket. So you can get stuff from, I think Tom Models Works, certainly White Ensign Models. The Edward put etch sets out for it. So if you shop around, I'm sure you'll pick something up. If you want to backdate it to 1941, Pontos is the way to go, and you get everything in the kit that you need, including depth markers, wooden decks, bags and bags of resin, lots of turned brass, and quite a bit of photo etch as well. So if you're interested in what we've got in the way of upgrade set, look out for the next one, and the best way to not miss it is to hit the subscribe and notification bells. Okay, that was our brief jog through the King George V kit. Let's have a look at the photo etch and stuff next. I will see you then. Thanks for looking in. Bye for now.